Welcome to episode 2 of the Go-To Physio show, the show that helps you to build a thriving word-of-mouth private practice. Coming up in today's show, we've got Carl Morris, where we're going to dive deep into the importance of the story and attention. I hope you enjoy the show. So welcome back, and I'm really excited to have Carl Morris as my very first in-person guest with the Go-To Physio show. Now, Carl and myself, we worked together with the Huddersfield Giants. I first met Carl in 2012, end of 2012, 2013 season, wasn't it, Carl? And Carl came in as the sports psychologist or the performance coach, the mind coach for the Giants, and the stuff he implemented was quite unbelievable, really. And I found as I listened to Carl that there was a lot of stuff that I could take, and I did take, and put in to my own practice to improve my results, especially the subjective assessment. Carl's had a massive influence in myself. So Carl, thanks for agreeing to come on the show. And obviously last week you gave the viewers a nice overview of the cockpit analogy as well, which was really good, and I'm really looking forward to having you on the show on a weekly basis.
Yeah, it was a magical time there at the Giants. I think looking back now for a team, Huddersfield Giants, who not the biggest club in the world, to win the sort of league leaders trophy for the first time in 8 years was a perfect example of a club changing a story, wasn't it? And I'm sure we're going to talk about the story, about how powerful the old story was there, and collectively we managed to literally change the story, and create some history.
Exactly, and that's the exact same thing that we're trying to do with our patients, and especially the more persistent pain patients that come into us that have, especially the clinic here, and a lot of the cases that I would see, these people have been around the houses, and they really do well and truly believe the old story, just like the Huddersfield Giants players, and staff and employees almost started to believe in the fans.
It's a really important point, Dave, and I certainly found in my career working with people, when I fully understood the power of the story, and it was from the research of a chap called Timothy Wilson, Harvard professor, and when you begin to understand that whether it's a team or a business or a unique individual, when you understand that we're all just a bunch of stories, and the thing is with a story is if you repeat it often enough, it becomes real. It becomes your narrative, and unless you change that story, you're not going to get different outcomes. One of the really interesting things that I've discovered with this is that within the brain, within everybody's brain, there's something called the thinker and the prover, in the sense that what the thinker thinks, the prover seeks to prove. So if I think I'm an unlucky person, the prover in my brain is always constantly looking out for evidence to support that belief, to support that story, and it's amazing when you get to understand the power of story, and then how to begin to change that story. As we found with the Giants, and I'm sure as you're finding with some of your clients, your patients, when the story changes, you get some amazing results. But unless you deal with the story, you're only on the surface, aren't you?
Exactly, and that's it. And story is very powerful because we remember stories as well. And again, you'll be able to tell me probably why, but the power of story, from kids, we all remember the stories we were told as kids. They're ingrained in the brain, and story is very powerful. Why do you think that is?
I think for me, one of the most important thing about a story in terms of the change process is when you introduce the idea to people, the beauty of it is we all know that a story can change. So it's a great metaphor for people that they realise through their life. You mentioned when we were at school, it can be a passing comment from a PE teacher that says, "Oh, Dave, you're not a sporty type, you are you?" And that one sentence can build a story in somebody's mind. Thinker and prover go to work, and every time you drop the ball in rugby or whatever, the prover says, "Oh, that's you, Dave. You're not sporty." Or musical or whatever it is. But I think the big key is that there seems so much power in the word story. Because when you say that to people, they go, yeah, I have been carrying a story around me. But the really great thing is we all know, we've all been brought up with the idea that a story can change.
Exactly. And this kind of goes in, and we're going to go into this in a lot more detail over the coming weeks, but most stories have a hero, and this kind of fits into what you were talking last week about understanding the individual and not the side of the pain, and that hero in the story ultimately is going to be the patient. It's not going to be the side of pain. It's going to be how that person overcomes this injury. The transformation is important in the story to ultimately have that happy ending.
If you look at most myths, Dave, another word for story, that's exactly it. That the myths that we remember, the stories we remember, is that the hero has a problem, and he goes about overcoming that problem and comes through the other side. And those are the things that we remember. So what it really reinforces is, for the physio, is that you haven't got a knee in front of you, you haven't got a back in front of you, you haven't got an elbow in front of you. You've got a human being with a very, very unique story, and you need to find out what that story is, and also then help them create a potential new story.
Exactly.
Because if the story is powerful enough, be that a person, the story could be something like being able to walk in the park every day or whatever it is. But if that future story, that future potential story is so strong, they will adhere to your program. There's a big enough why to create the how.
Exactly. That's so important. And just a few points that you've said there is understanding the story isn't necessarily just going through a run-of-the-mill questions. What medication are you taking? Previous injuries, blah, blah, blah. Behind every injury, there's a story. And it's very, very important for us to understand the story behind the injury, because every injury is slightly different, and there's an emotional reaction with an injury. So a run-of-the-mill ankle sprain that you're just going through with your subjective assessment, any previous injuries, I sprained my ankle in 2008. Any other injuries? Knee, and to you as a therapist, you may assume that the knee was a big problem, but actually that run-of-the-mill ankle sprain might have stopped that person missing a final or missing something that they wanted to do but they couldn't do. So there was a massive emotional attachment component to that injury, and even scars and stuff like that, Carl. With some of the more persistent cases that I remember, I had a lady with knee pain, and she physically could not look at her scar or touch her scar. So the story behind the injury, how she felt about that body part, what is that telling the subconscious mind?
Yeah, exactly, Evan. You've just mentioned the subconscious mind there, and the really interesting thing about the subconscious mind is its primary role is to protect you.
Exactly.
It's to keep you safe. And you go back to some of these injuries. Well, what's the best way of keeping somebody safe? The story could be, well, avoid the pitch, avoid the court, avoid whatever it is that created that situation. But unless, as you say, unless you actually uncover what that story is about, you've just written down ankle injury and move on. No, you can't do that. There needs to be a clearer picture of the whole story around that to see how that person in their past history, how have they responded to challenges? Because one of the other things that we'll talk about is resilience. People are far more resilient than they think. But sometimes you've actually got to dig a little bit, find out the story of when they've been resilient.
Absolutely.
And that's a resource that you can use in the future again. Because one of the things that people do is often they actually forget when they have been resilient. So part of the story process is uncovering past episodes of heroism.
Yeah.
You know, everybody's been a hero at different times in different ways, but often they've forgotten that.
And I'm going to hold you there, and you're skipping ahead to my last question. But you said something really good here, and that's really going to, I'm going to come back to that, so because this stuff is brilliant. But you said something about the job of the subconscious mind is sometimes to protect and avoid. Mm-hmm. And that's something we see a lot, Carl, in the clinic. And that's something you're going to see in the objective assessment, is when we get someone doing some movements, very often is they're going to avoid loading or putting stress through certain tissues that there's a story behind. Yeah. So again, the subconscious mind, my interpretation, is perceiving a threat to these tissues still, and the person avoids loading them. So again, what we're seeing in the objective assessment is ultimately how that person has reacted to their story. So if we don't understand the story in the subjective assessment, then it's going to be very, very hard to get clarity in your objective assessment to then have the confidence to design a good treatment plan, to then ultimately get the adherence to that treatment plan to get that ideal outcome. And just before we go back to resilience, Carl, what are the key fundamentals to changing a story? So this will kind of lead you into that anyways.
The key fundamentals to changing a story, I would say, is attention. Is that on a daily basis, is what are we putting our attention on? And I have a fundamental principle that either your attention is on something useful or useless.
Yeah.
And very often, if the story is panning out in a negative way, a person's attention will very much be in the useless column. The other thing that is also very, very powerful in terms of changing a story, and again, this is where your information gathering with your clients is very important. What is really powerful is that person's environment. What are the triggers in their environment? What are other people saying to them in their environment? Yeah. That's why, we saw it. What you created at the Giants was so powerful, because there was a collective belief that the physio treatment that the Giants were getting was superior to anything in rugby league. And I saw it kick in. Players were getting back on the pitch faster. They were playing well after injury because there was a belief around the story of the environment that they were in. So again, going back to that individual client that you're working with, look at what seems to be irrelevant, because it's not irrelevant. Good. What is that? How supportive is the husband or wife or the family or work colleagues or whatever it is? Because these can provide key leverage points to either keep the story or change the story.
Exactly. And we're going to talk a lot about attention in up and coming brain booster segments with yourself, Carl, because that was one of the biggest things you taught me about with attention. But the other thing, just to come back to, is you made a very good point there about other people, and I think it's very important that we bring our patients' attention to people who might be adding fuel to the old story. So just bringing your attention, and what I will say to a lot of people with more persistent cases is I will tell their partner to stop asking them how their back is, how their knee is, because what people then, they become their knee. And that's absolutely massive in sport, where the head coach almost does it, where the person's an ACL injury or whatever, they're out for 6 months, they come in, and players, because they're not in the normal environment, they're in a different environment, players feel awkward, and then the first thing they say is, how's the knee? So this player or person has been asked, how's the knee? 10 times a day.
Is that a person can end up wearing the injury like a medal around the neck.
Exactly. Because we see this every day clinically.
One of the things that is very powerful for human beings. We all like attention. We all like to feel understood. And suddenly, if the knee becomes a conversation point, or the back, or whatever, as you say, it just constantly reinforces the story. And I'll say to clients that I work with, what's more important to you? Is it maintaining this current story with the attention that you get with it, or actually do you want a future that you're really going to enjoy? Exactly. And so when people really, really get how powerful the binding of the story is, they start to understand all these different factors. But you, as the therapist, have provided them with an understanding that they didn't have. They didn't realise how important the questions other people ask them about the back or the knee or whatever are to just bind the story. So, they can actually then take charge of their own script.
Yeah.
My fundamental belief with all this is that I want people writing their own story. I don't want the story given to them by others, by society or whatever.
Yeah.
Fundamentally, we've all got to take responsibility for our own story. But if we don't understand the power of it, we won't do that.
Exactly. And that leads us nicely into us as therapists, like last week's episode, trying to have certain exercises and trying to fit the person into our exercises versus what we need to be doing is fitting a rehab plan around that person's needs. Yeah, and I think that's exactly what you're saying there is making that person responsible for writing the story, and we've got a big influence in that initial assessment and actually helping that person to write that story. So what that looks like practically for me is I do not go past the subjective assessment until I understand what the ideal outcome for the patient is. So I'll always say to my mentorship therapists, how can I design a rehab program if I don't know where the person wants to get to? So again, a lot of these people, I'll say to them, where do you want to get to? I just don't want to be in pain. So again, that GPS, or the reticular activator in the subconscious, is set to anywhere but pain. Yeah, but they don't know where they want to get to, so there's no destination. So I think that's very, very important.
You mentioned it's a great analogy for people to think about. If we've all got sat navs in the car, if you get in your car and you just punch in Manchester, you're going to end up in Manchester, but you're not going to end up where you want in Manchester. But don't blame the sat nav if you get lost.
Yeah,
it's your responsibility to program the sat nav, just as it's the individual's responsibility to program the destination that they want to go to, not where they don't want to go to.
Exactly.
Another analogy I have is you wouldn't go in a supermarket with a list of things you didn't want, would you?
No,
You'd be just wandering around all day. But the minute you go in there with a list of 5 things that you do want, those 5 things direct your behaviour.
Nice. Exactly. And that probably was the highlight of this show just there. Your attention and your intent dictate your behavior, and the same, we can take that from movement behavior as well. Okay, so that's very, very important. I want you just to digest what Carl has just said there. And in the coming Brain Booster segments, we're going to start to give you some applicable strategies that you can start to use to direct attention and to also figure out what that end goal is and to help write the story. So that's really good.
What I would say with everybody listening in or watching in there is get excited about being able to change stories, because for you, you've experienced it, the pleasure that you get in helping people change the story is far bigger than just, it's great if the knee gets better, but if they understand the bigger picture of story, you've provided a tremendous value to them.
Exactly. And my goal with every patient is to make a meaningful impact on their life. That's my goal. It isn't to get rid of knee pain, it's to give them back value to their life. That's why I'm in this business, that's why I've got a clinic, that's why I've done an online mentorship to help more therapists give more meaningful impacts. And I think once my attention is set to that, then that helps me with my behavior in order to guide that patient. And I just want to go back to the story, the hero and the destination. The hero is the patient, we are the guide. And the hero usually meets a guide who helps him get to the destination. So we're not the hero in the story where we're fixing a back or fixing a knee. We're simply guiding that person along the journey to reach that destination. And I think that's very, very important to understand as a therapist, is we're not the hero in the story, we're the guide. The hero is the patient. And if we put the patient at the forefront of it, then we've got a great chance, because then that story is specific to them and more meaningful to them. So that's really good. And just the last point today, Carl, because the people are going to see, again, we could spend 2 days on a course talking about just this segment here. But why this is the last little bit today. Actually, there's 2 bits. There's one question I'm going to put you on the spot for that you said to me with a previous teaching thing. But why do people keep repeating the old story?
I think it goes back to a hardwired mechanism inside us, a little bit related back to the unconscious mind. It is that the unconscious mind sort of says, well, primarily it is aimed at survival. So your unconscious mind wants you to survive. And the way it thinks is that what I did yesterday, if I do what I did yesterday, today, I'll still survive. So the behaviour might be very negative, but I've survived. So if I do the same again for another day, I'll keep surviving. So the unconscious mind thinks very sort of short term about replicating behaviour. So it's kind of like that's why we can look at the whole change process in many areas. It's challenging for people because of that unconscious desire to just keep replicating the same thing. But when you actually bring the story out into the open and get people to recognise that, then they can see the difference, and then they can see why they can change.
Yeah, and the more I've been thinking about this a lot lately myself in all aspects of life, and the first step is awareness.
Completely.
Yeah, and I think that's what you're saying there, isn't it?
What I talk with people a lot about is that 99% of your life you're on autopilot. Your unconscious mind is just operating systems, and that's a good thing. If you had to think every day about how to make a cup of tea and get yourself dressed, it'd be a long day. But the problem is with autopilot, it can actually wreck your life, because you just autopilot in everything, and if it's a negative thing, you'll just keep replicating it. Whereas when you actually can recognize, as you said, when you become aware of that, and the need to create a different story, and as you say, a very clear destination. If people have got a strong enough why, they'll find the how.
Exactly, and that's what we're going to talk a lot about in the next few weeks. And I just want to go back to the resilience just to finish this segment. And again, I don't know if you're going to remember exactly what you said before in a prior teaching engagement with my mentorship students, but about what's a powerful question that you can ask to show people their resilience. Can you remember? Sorry.
One of the stories I've got, Dave, is I've not got a good memory.
Yeah.
I think for me, we'll touch in future episodes on the power of questions, because questions direct attention. You might correct me, but very simply, at what point in your life have you been most resilient?
That's it. You got it. That was it. So yeah, I've got here, when have you been your most resilient? And just talk about the power of that question just to finish today.
Well, if you think about it, if you ask that question, when in your life have you been most resilient? The first thing that your brain does.
Don't give too much away for the brain boosters. I know what you're going to do.
Your brain will search for an answer to that question.
Yeah.
So it's immediate. It's like punching a question into Google. Away you go. The algorithms kick in, and it comes up with an answer. Now, there will be a point in everybody's life when they've been resilient. They may not remember it straight away, but they will do.
Yeah.
And they'll have maybe long forgotten that. But it could be something at junior school, or they broke a leg and got back on the football field, or whatever it is. But by asking the question, you get that search through their personal history, and then go, I was strong then. I did prove to myself I could do it.
Yeah.
But the environment that they're currently in may have buried that deeply.
Exactly. And what Carl has just said there, he's giving you massive clues into how we can apply all this Okay, this is very easy to apply, and that's why I like working with Carl. That's why I've got Carl working very, very closely with some close high-level therapists that I work with privately. Okay, because Carl gives us an ability to apply this information. This doesn't have to be complicated. We don't have to have sports psychologist degrees, because we're doing stuff anyways and bringing our awareness to how powerful we can be in helping that person get to the ideal outcome. As I said, it's stuff we're doing anyway, but just understanding and tweaking a couple of little things and understanding the thought process of why we're asking these questions. It can be very, very powerful, and I've seen firsthand. And obviously, I want to thank you again for the influence you've had on my.
Just on that point, David, these things, they are simple things, and they need to be simple things, because I've seen it over the years. The most effective coaches that I've ever seen are smart enough to keep it simple.
Exactly.
But actually, you need to know a few of the key simple things, and then just do them better and better and better. Concepts like attention and questions, the simple concepts. But you can get better and better at it if you stick with that.
Absolutely, and I said, I can attest to that. And my motto here with the therapist mentorship is do the basics extraordinary. And when I went on to some of these courses, that they were getting a little bit carried away with the claims they were making and going to all these higher levels and all sorts. And I'm just like, it just overwhelms people and it overwhelms our patients. And once we keep things simple, you don't get overwhelmed, the patient doesn't get overwhelmed, they can understand, and magical things happen. Yeah. And that's very, very powerful. So as I said, Carl has dropped a lot there today. But that's just literally the tip of the iceberg for what's under the hood there with Carl. And I said, I'm very excited to introduce Carl to you. You've seen a little bit last week. Every week now, Carl's kindly agreed to do a brain booster. And as I said, you're going to see a lot more of Carl in the coming months. And I think Carl's going to have a massive influence on helping you start to make sense of some of the trickier cases, but most importantly, how to apply this information in the real world to get real results, but most importantly, to make meaningful impacts on your patients' lives. So, Carl, thanks very much. Okay, so this week's lit review, I'm just going to do something a little bit different to last week. So we're going to keep looking at different parts of the body and see maybe how they're going to influence each other. And I thought this is a good paper, especially with being introduced now in a bit more detail to Carl Morris. You're going to hear Carl talk about attention quite a bit. Okay, so this is a study now, it must be said straight away, limitation. It's on non-painful or patients that are people, not necessarily patients that don't have a pain experience, so keep that in mind, okay? But the effect of diaphragmatic breathing on attention, negative effect and stress in healthy adults, okay? So again, obviously they're saying intro, the diaphragmatic breathing and efficient integrative body-mind training for dealing with stress and psychosomatic conditions. Okay, so when we inhale, obviously we're going to go more sympathetic. When we exhale, we're going to go parasympathetic. Okay, heart rate increases when we inhale, it decreases when we exhale, where we tend to be more into the parasympathetic. Okay, decreasing the respiratory frequency, okay, will maximize the amount of blood gases. Okay, and that's pretty important. So again, a lot of the respiratory system can get sensitized, just like the musculoskeletal system has inefficiencies due to sensitization. Okay, so again, the respiratory system works very, very similar. The heart rate will increase, the breathing rate will increase, and it may not necessarily reflect what's actually needed for the body. Okay, so again, somebody's working away at their office and they're getting a little bit stressed. They see their boss coming over, okay, and it's just their boss, it's just a person, but their heart rate is reacting like there's an elephant or a tiger or a lion in the room. Okay, so hopefully you've probably had some kind of experience like that in the past when you start to get nervous or whatever. Okay, so psychological studies have revealed breathing practice to be effective, okay, for intervention for emotion enhancement, a reduction in anxiety, depression and stress. So again, a lot of persistent back pain patients, they would have one or maybe a few of these symptoms, and very often stress may precede the back pain as well. Okay, so a one-day breathing exercise was found to relieve emotional exhaustion and depersonalization induced by job burnout. Okay, so again, a lot of these high-powered, stressful scenarios we're going to see come into us. 30-second intervention with daily duration of 5 minutes can significantly decrease the anxiety of pregnant women. Okay, so again, there's plenty of papers out there showing the powers of breathing. Okay, and earlier studies have observed an attention vigilance impairment related to breathing dysfunction in dementia and sleep disordered breathing in individuals of all ages. Okay, so again, a lot of people with back pain especially aren't great sleepers, although obviously we can't make assumptions based on that. Okay, so that's just something to be aware of. Okay, a growing number of clinical studies has demonstrated breathing-induced meditation may represent a new normal pharmacological approach for improving specific aspects of attention. Okay, so if we just click back, so ultimately what we're trying to do is we're trying to change the heart rate variability, we're trying to change the breathing rate variability. Okay, and if we can do that, we're also hopefully going to change the movement of the diaphragm and pelvic floor from a musculoskeletal point of view. Okay, and there's another few studies that look at breathing and movement of the diaphragm and pelvic floor, which I'll talk about on a different episode. Okay, so again, if we can improve heart rate variability, improve oxygenation, pulmonary function, and muscle strength of the respiratory muscles, etc. Okay, so a functional MRI study detected a significant increase in activation of the bilateral inferior frontal and temporal regions under meditation as compared to a relaxation condition. Okay, so again, having that output, trying to influence that via the inputs going in. Okay, so this study, okay, it was through an IT company, so we need to obviously be careful in terms of your population, whether it's athletes, etc. But the one nice thing they did here is they kept it into their kind of environment rather than bringing them into a lab. Okay, so again, to avoid any potential anxiety by being in a laboratory or whatever you want to call it. Okay, so 40 participants, and they performed diaphragmatic breathing. Okay, if their respiratory rate decreased while their respiratory amplitude increased in waveform. Okay, so their breathing depth improved while their breathing rate decreased. Okay, and we see that a lot of times. Okay, both groups completed a positive and negative effect schedule. Okay, and the number cancellation test. Okay, and also cortisol test as well for obviously stress. And a final test similar to baseline was implemented at the end of the 20th intervention. Okay, whereas the control group received only an introduction of breathing and rest, a baseline test, and a final test. Okay, whereas the actual the intervention group, they received 20 sessions of breathing control intervention. Each intervention involved 15 minutes resting breathing session. Okay, and then a 15-minute, so obviously just sitting there breathing, and then a 15-minute focused diaphragmatic breathing session. Okay, so again, there was some general verbal guidance from a breathing coach who spoke at a slow speed to help participants become more easily involved. So again, 30 minutes, maybe a little bit too long for a lot of people, you know, in the real world. Trying to get people to sit there for 30 minutes may be a challenge. Okay, but certainly as we saw already with 5-minute studies and a little bit less than that, there was some promising effects. Okay, so keep that in mind, that do we generally just give 30 minutes of that? Maybe not. Okay, so again, in my world, I think it might come up with a bit of challenges for that. You'd obviously have to pick your patient. Okay, so each session was conducted every other day. Okay, on weekdays. So again, really good adherence. Again, another real world problem. And during rest and breathing, participants instructed to breathe in a normal state. Okay. During diaphragmatic breathing, they're instructed to inhale as deeply as they could while their abdomen expanded, and to exhale as slowly as they could while their abdomen contracted. Okay, so again, what that's going to do ultimately, okay, if we can exhale as slowly as we can, that's going to help us obviously slow down that exhalation. We'll spend more time in that parasympathetic state. Okay, so that's the value of that. But again, they had under instruction of a breathing training coach with the feedback via recording device. So again, clinically, are we going to be having to do that? Are we going to be able to coach them for 30 minutes in the clinic? Probably not. So obviously just keep that in mind. Okay, 2 breathing conditions recorded during the entire 30-minute training. Okay, so let's just have a look. The other big thing here as well, okay, during the breathing process, all participants kept their eyes closed and breathed through their nose. Okay, so nasal breathing, very, very powerful. We use it a lot, and again, there's lots and lots of benefits from it, like nitric oxide, etc. That doesn't happen when you breathe through your mouth. And again, there's these studies I'll talk about on episodes coming up. Okay, so the psychological measurements, the PANIS, which is a 5-point Likert scale that measures participants' feelings during the past week. Okay, so they've done that on a scale of 1 to 5, and again, it's consistent with and largely uncorrelated, stable and reliable across cultures, and can distinctively estimate PA and NA at the same time. Okay, so positive attitude and negative attitude. So they had a neuroendocrine test with the cortisol, and what they found was that there was no between group differences in terms of age. Okay, so again, pretty good, years of education, a work experience. Okay, so the respiratory rate is interesting. Okay, so this is really, really powerful. Okay, and again, they're not paying patients, but for me, clinically, I see this a lot. Okay, we can see this change quite quickly and around this kind of scale when we intervene with some of these interventions. Okay, and again, we don't even need, from my clinical experience, we don't need that 30 minutes to get this result. Okay, so this showed that the average respiratory rate to be 4 times a minute in the diaphragmatic breathing conditions. Okay, and 17 times a minute in the resting breathing conditions. Okay, so that's a big difference. Okay, so that's nearly 4 times greater in terms of a respiratory system. A heart rate that's probably working a little bit harder, muscles that are working harder, okay, among many other things. Okay, so 4 times a minute versus 17, it's a big difference. Okay, and what else did it show? So the simple effects of breathing showed that the respiratory frequencies in diaphragmatic breathing were significantly below the resting breathing at every intervention time point. Okay, so successfully reduced the frequency in the diaphragmatic breathing conditions. Okay, then the control breath. Okay, so very powerful in terms of generic sensitization of the respiratory system. Okay, so again, we'd hypothesis that the respiratory system desensitized. Okay, and now let's look at some of the other effects. Okay, so time and group revealed a marginally significant interaction. Okay, a small effect was conducted and revealed that the diaphragmatic breathing group demonstrated a significant reduction in negative attitude score. Okay, so they measured the between groups for the positive, and there was an insignificant interaction. Okay, so the basically in the real world, the diaphragmatic breathing group, it doesn't necessarily make you more positive, it just makes you a little bit less negative. Okay, and you and I probably know from working with a lot of these persistent pain patients that even just taking away some of that negativity can be very powerful. Okay, and again, once you go through these episodes on the Go To Physio show, you're going to start to see, especially with Carl, some very simple stuff that you can actually apply in the real world. Okay, so sustained attention. The NCT result revealed a significant interaction between time and group, and the diaphragmatic breathing group showed a significant increase in score after the intervention. Okay, so again, in real world, that's you're able to be more present. Okay, so again, for a lot of people, and again, I know I'm going to say it again, that these people weren't in pain, but for a lot of people, their attention is being taken towards the pain. They're focusing on the pain. They're focusing on every type of sensation that's going through their body. Okay, so to get their attention away from their body and just be present can be very useful for us. Okay, so again, if breathing can show this with healthy people, then in my opinion, it's definitely worth giving a go. And clinically, it makes a massive difference to pain. Okay, it makes a massive difference focusing someone's attention, getting them present by focusing on the breath. When they're focusing on their breath, they're present. Okay, so they're not focusing on the pain or whatever sensations they're feeling. Okay, so in terms of cortisol levels, the diaphragmatic breathing group showed a significant decrease in cortisol concentration after the intervention, where the concentration was significantly lower in test 3 and 4 as compared to test 1. So the more they did it, obviously, the less less stressed they were. Okay, and again, interestingly, no similar result was found with the control group. Okay, so their cortisol levels didn't change much, just from sitting there. Okay, so again, the negative attitude score decreased after the intervention. We're on to discussion now for everyone listening on the podcast version, but the PA positive attitude did not change. Okay, so sustained attention scores increased after the intervention as well. So they're being present, which can be very, very powerful, in my opinion, at not focusing on pain. Okay, so again, we decrease the negativity attention, we stay present, and then the ability to do movement or just be present with your family, that can be very, very powerful for a lot of people. Okay, we interpret the findings as showing the potential benefits of diaphragmatic breathing practice for improving cognitive function and reduce a negative effect of physiological responses to stress in healthy adults. Okay, and certainly that's my own personal experience using a lot of these breathing exercises. I've studied various types of breathing exercises. I've played around with it a lot. And the one thing I would say is it's not just a case of teaching somebody to breathe through their diaphragm. Okay, so again, this group here, they had 15 minutes of just sitting there, eyes closed. Okay, and then they had 15 minutes with a breathing coach. Okay, so compare that with maybe 60 seconds of teaching someone to breathe through the diaphragm. Is it the 15 minutes? Is it the eyes closed? Is it a combination of all of them? Okay, so just keep that in mind as well when interpreting these results. Okay, so it's good, the diaphragmatic breathing, but it's also a lot of it. It's not just about the diaphragm, it's about desensitizing the respiratory system. Okay, and again, if we can do that, then very often that diaphragm will start to move itself as well. Okay, so keep that in mind when we put this into practice. Okay, so again, these were healthy volunteers, and in that case, we estimated improvement in mood and cognition and physiological response of stress rather than clinical symptoms. Okay, so just keep that in mind. Okay, so it's interesting, but obviously we need to look more into this with people in pain, with anxiety, with maybe depression, with sleep problems. Okay, from studies point of view, from real world, clinically, from my experience, breathing, very, very powerful. And again, you'll have some smart ass who'll say, oh, I breathe 20,000 times a day. But like everything, are you breathing efficiently? Okay, are you using excessive energy to take that one breath? Okay, so it's not just about breathing in and out through the nose, through the mouth. It's about using the least amount of energy possible to take a breath. Okay, that's energy efficiency. And for a lot of these people are expending a lot of energy just doing the basics. Okay, you can desensitize that respiratory system. You can give people back a lot of energy, okay, to use elsewhere. Okay, so again, just be respectful of that. I don't think all breathing practices is created equal, and it's quite an art sometimes to get people to buy into it. But it's definitely worth trying with a lot of people, and a lot of people get a lot of value from the nasal breathing in particular, from my experience. Okay, so getting people to nasal breathe and just changing up the heart rate variability and that the respiratory rate, getting them back into rest and digest, it can be very powerful. And don't forget, you can also integrate this with your rehab before they go to sleep, before they get up, etc. When they feel stressed, when they feel their pain is coming on, so we can direct their attention Okay, so again, there's a lot of benefits to this. Okay, so that's the study. I hope you enjoyed this one. Slightly longer this week, but I think it's a pretty important one. And it's a study of the effect of diaphragmatic breathing on attention, negative effect, and stress in healthy adults. Okay, and again, this was done in China. Okay, so. But again, obviously, the assessment tools they were using, they were pretty confident that they would see the carryover as well across different populations. Okay, so that's it this week's for this week's Lit Review. I'll see you next week when we go through another paper. The Therapist Mentorship Program was put together to help you accelerate your ability to have confidence and clarity with any patient that comes through the door. It's a very intimate 90-day experience where you work closely with myself and my most trusted therapists to put together a very, very specific structure in your assessment, your treatment and your rehab for every single patient so that you can truly get the results that both you and your patient deserve so you can become that go-to therapist. If you want more information, just click on the button below this video or go to thegotophysio.com/mentorship. So welcome back to the Build Your Go-To Physio Private Practice business segment in the Go-To Physio show. Now this week what I want to talk about is the importance of your receptionist, of the person who takes your phone calls, of the first person who your patients see. Now if you are a one-man therapist or one-man band, a one-lady clinic, that's absolutely fine at the moment. But as you start to grow and your clinic starts to grow and your word of mouth starts to grow and your diary's busier, you're naturally going to have to progress. As you become that go-to physio, you're going to have to hire an admin staff. Now, the first time you think about it and you're like, oh my God, I have to pay that person 18,000 or 15,000 or whatever it is, whether it's euros or sterling, and they're not going to be making any money. That's the natural mindset. Whereas the actual reality is that person's saving you so much time that you can focus solely on helping that patient. You don't have to worry about taking money. You don't have to worry about sending exercises, all that other stuff, which actually is going to help you continue to get better results with your patients, which is going to continue to give you more time, more attention on your patients, and also then continue to grow that go-to physio practice based on word of mouth, referrals based on your ability to get results. Okay, so as you grow, so that was almost a tip in itself. Don't worry, you are going to naturally start to go, oh my God, I don't want to take anyone on, but it'll be the best money you ever spend, I promise you. Okay, if you get the right person. But when that person comes in, I just want you to be aware of what they're saying to patients. So the importance of having that patient, okay, in a good state of mind when they come to you, it gives you the best opportunity to get the best outcome for that patient. Okay, so again, that therapist, they need to have at some level an understanding of pain science, okay? Because that person can actually help you get a result by them having a good understanding that pain doesn't mean damage, that pain is ultimately a sensation, etc. That can be very, very powerful. So as they're chatting in the waiting room before you come out and that person says something to your admin team, that's an opportunity for them to start reinforcing your message in the treatment room. So I'm not saying they have to go on a weekend course or anything like that, but I just want you to pay attention to the words that your admin staff are saying to patients. Are they reinforcing the message that you're saying in the treatment room, or are they actually maybe being counterproductive? And at least once a month, all my staff, we work with Carl Morris in helping change a person's expectations, in helping change a person's experience, where maybe in the past they've had poor experiences with other therapists, okay? Because we obviously get a lot of people here who have failed traditional approaches. We get a lot of people who have been around the houses, who are frustrated, who are angry. So it's even more important for us now to give that person a different experience, but also to help change their expectations of what's going to happen, because their story up to this point is being to a physio, can't help, feel better initially, pain comes back, blah, 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 blah. Okay, but what we're trying to do is change the story and our front team, our admin team, are a very, very big part in that. And I always say that to the staff here, that the front staff are just as responsible and are as important as the therapist in helping that person get that ideal outcome. Okay, something to consider, a little bit different, something that, when I actually thought about this and when we implemented it, we started to get very, very good results with it. Okay, so just be aware of it. It is worth the time and effort. As you start to grow and your confidence and clarity improves, you start to get better results, you get more word of mouth referrals. That's then the time for you when you're going to start to look for that admin person. So keep that in mind. Do they have the ability to help you get great results with your patients? Okay, so I'll see you next week on the Build Your Go-To Physio Private Practice segment.
The mentorship's been really good for both myself and some of the colleagues that I work with in elite sport. And for myself, it's probably brought together a lot of my own ideas and practices, and it's been good to follow sort of a pathway in terms of assessment and treatment and rehab of someone else who obviously has been there and done it in elite sport and also in private practice. For some of the colleagues and some of the people I work with, particularly for those who are established in sport and particularly those who sort of coming into sport, it really helps them to sort of hone down sort of their own pathway whilst following someone else's and something they've obviously done before and been tried into.